Hello everyone and welcome to lesson 24.2C. I've entitled this video Colonial Times. This is going to cover pages 743 to 746. Colonial Times. Australia and New Zealand were colonized by the British. However, the British were not the first Europeans to visit the region. Explorers from other European countries had been sailing around Australia and landing on its shores for hundreds of years before the British arrived. Europeans come to the region. During the 1600s, 1700s, and 1800s, Dutch, Spanish, French, and Portuguese explorers visited Oceania. Some of them mapped Australia's coastline. Some even went ashore to explore coastal areas and search for supplies. In 1642, the Dutch East India Company sent Abel Tasman on a mission to sail around the Australian continent. During this voyage of discovery, Tasman circled the island of Tasmania and then sighted the coast of New Zealand. More than a century would pass, however, before Europeans started colonizing the region. Question number 1. During the 1600s, 1700s, and 1800s, which countries' explorers would visit Oceania? They would be visited by the Netherlands or the Dutch, Spain or the Spanish, France or the French, and Portugal or the Portuguese. British Australia. Perhaps the most well-known British explorer was the sailor Captain James Cook. He carried out 3 voyages in the 1760s and 1770s. Following Cook's explorations, the British government prepared to send settlers to the wild, unexplored lands of Australia. Most of the first colonists sent to Australia did not go by choice. In 1788, a group of 11 British ships, known as the First Fleet, landed on Australia's east coast. The crowded ships carried 778 convicted criminals from the British Isles. The First Fleet also included 250 soldiers and government officials. This was the first shipment of about 160,000 convicts sent to Australia during the next 80 years, due to a lack of space in England's prisons. Living conditions were terrible, and punishments were harsh for convicts held in Australia's cruel, filthy prisons. For many years, Australia was known to most of the world as a prison colony. Question 2. Which British explorer would become the most well-known British explorer to explore around Australia? Captain James Cook. Question number 3. What type of colonists did Britain send in its first fleet in 1788? They sent, yes, there were definitely soldiers and government officials, but the bulk of the crew, or the bulk of the people on board, were convicted criminals or convicts. Question number 4. What would Britain send to Australia over an 80-year time period from 1788 to the mid-1800s? Of a group of about 160,000 convicts. Question number 5. Why did Britain send so many convicts to Australia? Because they were running out of space in their prisons back in England. Question 6. What was life like for the convicts in Australia? Life was not good. It was terrible. The conditions were poor. The punishments were severe. The prisons were cruel and filthy. Question number 7. For many years, what was Australia known for being to the rest of the world? A prison colony. Beginning in the late 1700s, a settlement began to form in Sydney. Colonists were slow to come to the area, but in time, Sydney grew into a busy center of trade and industry. Settling the inland areas of Australia did not happen for many years. Only a few people other than escaping criminals dared to venture into the rough outback. By the 1880s, however, most of the continent had been explored by Europeans. Question number 9. What happened to... Question number 8. Beginning in the late 1700s, what settlement began to grow into a busy center of trade and industry? The city of Sydney, Australia. In 1851, an English prospector found gold near Bathurst, New South Wales. Soon after, thousands of people from all over Australia were camped in the area, digging for gold. Gold was discovered in other parts of Australia, and word spread across the globe. People from around the world flocked to Australia at a rate of 90,000 per year, all hoping to find a bounty of gold. Prospectors came from as far away as England, Ireland, China, and the United States. Question number 9. What happened in Australia in 1851 that would impact its history? Gold was discovered. Question number 10. Why were 90,000 people a year arriving in Australia during that time in history? They were all coming to Australia in the hopes of striking it rich and finding a bunch of gold. They were known as prospectors. They were hoping for the prospect of mining and finding riches in Australia through gold. Australia began to grow for other reasons as well. When resources such as coal, tin, and copper were discovered, workers came for mining jobs. Business owners started and built shops and hotels wherever towns sprang up, and there were people to spend money. Small towns grew into cities. Farmers planted crops in Australia's most fertile areas. Ranchers brought sheep and cattle from overseas, and Australia's ranching industry was born. Vast ranches, called stations, covered millions of acres in the outback and in other areas. Today, millions of sheep and cattle live on ranches all across Australia. Question number 9. What happened in Australia? Oh wait, we've already done that one. Let's try question number 11. Besides gold, what were other industries that were attracting people to come to Australia? There was coal, there was tin, there was copper. Question number 12. What were stations in Australia? That was just a word basically for the vast ranches that covered millions of acres in the outback and other parts of Australia. These ranches or stations had sheep and cattle living and grazing on them. Question number 13. What is a huge industry for Australia in the world today? Sheep is a huge industry for Australia. Question 14. What is another huge industry for Australia in the world today? Cattle. Challenges and conflict. As humans from other parts of the world moved to Australia, they brought animals with them. Ranchers brought dogs for guarding and herding sheep. Wealthy landowners imported European rabbits to hunt for sport. In an effort to rid sugarcane fields of a destructive beetle, farmers brought in huge poisonous cane toads. These and other non-native animal species caused major problems. Rabbits multiplied quickly to a population of 1 billion. They ate so much grass and so many wildflowers that entire areas were left bare. The cane toads also multiplied, crowding out and killing native animal species. Animals that are not native to an area but are brought from other places are called introduced species. It is impossible to estimate how much damage has been done to Australia's environment by introduced species. Some introduced species are now under control, but others continue to cause problems for humans and native animals. Question number 15. Why did ranchers from other countries bring dogs to Australia? So they could use them to guard and herd the sheep. Question 16. Why did people from other countries bring European rabbits to Australia? So they could hunt them for sport. Question 17. Why did people from other countries bring huge poisonous cane toads to Australia? Well, they were hoping to eradicate or destroy the beetles that were ruining some of the sugarcane fields. Question 18. How did the rabbits cause major headaches for Australia? Well, rabbits are able to reproduce quickly, and before long there was a billion population of rabbits, and there were so many rabbits that were eating the grass and the wildflowers that they were basically leaving bare whole areas of Australia. Question number 20. What does the phrase introduced species mean? Question 19. How did the cane toads cause major headaches for Australia? Well, the cane toads also multiplied, and they were taking over areas and killing some of the native species that were already living there. Question 20. What does the phrase introduced species mean? It is a species that is not native to an area, but is brought in from other places. And many times, the species that are already in the land can't handle this new introduced species because they haven't had to deal with them in the past. Question 21. What is the major challenge that introduced species can present to a country's environment? Well, sometimes those introduced species can decimate populations of animals that had been there. So that could be a real challenge. British settlers built their homes and farms all over Australia, often forcing native Aboriginal people off their land. thousands of Aboriginal families and tribes were forced to leave lands where their ancestors had lived for generations. Question 22. How were the Aboriginal people negatively affected by British settlers? Well, these British settlers began to build their homes and farms all over Australia, and many times these native Aboriginal people were forced off their lands, and many of them had been living there for a long time. Not unlike if you think about how Native Americans lived in the United States, and when we came to the United States, we pushed many of them off to their lands as well. So there is definitely a connection there to be made between our history and Australia's history. European diseases and violence steadily reduced the Aboriginal population. The survivors had no choice but to live on rugged lands that European settlers did not want. Question number 23. What were two ways that the Aboriginal people died due to the impact of European settlers? Through diseases that had been introduced to them and violence that was brought by the Europeans. Question 24. What decision did the Aboriginal people make in order to avoid the European settlers? Well, many of them said, you know what, I'm going to move to the outback on these rugged lands that the Europeans don't want to be in to escape their violence and their diseases. British New Zealand. Captain Cook explored the islands of New Zealand during the early 1770s. Cook reported to the British government that the fertile islands had many valuable natural resources and would be good places to colonize. Soon, British colonists and British, American, and French traders and whalers built settlements on North Island. At first, most relations between the Maori and foreign settlers were peaceful. In 1840, the British government, ruled by Queen Victoria, convinced Maori leaders to sign the Treaty of Waitangi. This treaty gave legal ownership and control of New Zealand to Great Britain, but it guaranteed protection and certain land rights to the Maori. As Europeans continued to arrive in New Zealand, the Maoris saw more and more of their land taken by foreign settlers. Maori society and ways of life weakened when British settlers brought new methods of farming and other features of European culture. Conflict between the Maori and British continued sporadically until 1872, when many Maori were killed and they lost most of their land to the British. As was happening in Australia, businesses, industries, farms, and sheep ranches were built across New Zealand. Sheep ranching changed the land, as native scrubland and forests were cleared to make pastures for livestock. Introduced species such as rabbits, goats, pigs, deer, rodents, and feral cats began destroying natural habitats. They killed many native animals and threatened the survival of entire species. Question number 25. How did Captain Cook's exploration of New Zealand in the early 1700s impact New Zealand and world history? Well, when Captain Cook saw what was possible in New Zealand, that there was a lot of land and natural resources to be had, many of those countries, Britain, America, France, sent people into New Zealand, and slowly but surely more and more Maori lands started to be lost to these people who came to settle and to colonize and to take over the valuable resources that were there. Question 26. What did the Treaty of Waitangi state? The Treaty of Waitangi stated that legal ownership and control of New Zealand would belong to Great Britain, but in return, Great Britain said, oh, you will be protected, Maori. You'll have land rights, and we will make sure that your people are protected. Question 27. How are the Maori negatively impacted by the arrival of Europeans? Well, in more and more ways, they lost their lands. More and more settlers took over their lands, and they were pushed further and further into other areas. Many Maori were killed in skirmishes and conflicts, and their landscape was also changed by these introduced species that also devastated the natural habitats. Well, thank you so much for watching. Before we go, we did talk about rabbits as an introduced species. So I have how the world sees rabbits, how Australia sees rabbits. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.